I knew it was over the moment Ethan Cole didn't look up from his laptop. That 32-year-old CEO sat across from me like I was outdated software that needed deleting. He smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. And I am Skylar James, 49 years old, and I had just spent 21 years at Aegis Core Systems building the cybersecurity backbone that made their $850 million in government contracts possible. Now I was being right-sized straight out the door. His first words weren't hello or thank you, just let's talk about organizational efficiency. Efficiency. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, but only if you believe in standing up for your worth and never letting your work be erased. And I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? What's the temperature like there? This is a fictional story. Some elements have been enhanced with AI to make it more vivid, but the emotions, the tension, the lessons, those are very real. Now, let me take you back and tell you how it all really unfolded. I had spent over 2 decades building the encryption systems that kept military communications secure from threats most people would never even understand. Nation-state attacks, silent intrusions, sophisticated breaches that never made the news because we stopped them before they could surface. That was my work. That was my life. And now this kid was reducing it to a cost-saving decision. Ethan Cole flipped open my performance file like it was something casual, something disposable. Look, Skylar, you've done solid work. Really? He said, not even bothering to meet my eyes. But you've been here a long time. We need people who are more agile, people who understand scalable innovation and AI-driven transformation. He smiled then. That kind of smile that looks polished on the outside but carries nothing behind it. If you're not aligned with where we're heading, he added, there's always the option to step aside. I had seen his type before, elite business school, zero real technical experience, convinced that leadership meant repeating buzzwords until everyone else stopped questioning them. Ethan was the nephew of our former CEO, Daniel Cole, and when his uncle stepped down last year, the board handed him the company like it was an inheritance, not a responsibility. He had never built anything that mattered, not a system, not a safeguard, not a solution under pressure. Yet here he was, deciding what still had value. Inside, everything went quiet, not anger, not panic, just that cold, familiar stillness I remembered from my early days in the Navy, the moment when the radar picked up something it shouldn't, and you knew without anyone saying it out loud that something was wrong. Very wrong. I glanced at the team photo sitting on the corner of my desk. Half of those engineers I had personally recruited straight out of top universities, people who trusted me to guide them through a world they barely understood yet. I remembered the long nights we spent together, fighting through system failures and failed penetration tests, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. I remembered standing beside them when everything broke, when deadlines closed in, when failure wasn't an option. I remembered missing my own daughter's wedding because one of our critical server clusters was under attack during a live defense operation. There wasn't a choice. There never was. I remembered going head-to-head with upper management more than once just to protect my team's salaries when budget cuts came knocking. And now, this kid was handing me a termination folder like it was some kind of polite exit gift. So I closed my laptop. No speech, no argument, no need. I stood up, slid the folder under my arm, and walked out. I passed my team. Some of them glanced up, then quickly looked away. I passed the glass conference room where executives pretended to be busy. I even walked past HR, the same woman who once asked if I could mentor her son. No one said a word. That kind of silence sticks with you. But what people don't understand is this silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's control. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove across town to a small diner I'd been going to for years. The kind of place that never changes. Worn booths, familiar faces, coffee that hits harder than it should. I sat there with a black coffee in front of me and finally allowed myself to think. Aegis Core had been my entire adult life. I joined when it was still a small operation. barely more than a group of former military engineers trying to build something that mattered. Back then, it wasn't about buzzwords or investors. It was about mission. I had watched it grow from nothing into a powerhouse worth hundreds of millions, and every critical system they relied on, every layer of protection, every core protocol, I built it, not in documents, not in manuals, in my head. I got home later than I expected. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. Quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you aware something fundamental has shifted. I set the termination folder down on the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of bourbon. Not the cheap kind I used on ordinary nights. The good one. The one I hadn't touched in years. Then I walked over to a drawer I hadn't opened in a very long time, buried beneath old documents, expired warranties, and forgotten paperwork was a slim manila envelope. No label, no markings. Just something I had kept out of instinct more than intention. I held it for a moment before opening it. Inside was the original provisional patent application. My name at the top. Not Aegis Corps'. Mine. I sat down slowly, the weight of memory settling in. It had been filed years ago, back when the company was still unstable, when legal processes were chaotic and nothing was properly finalized. I remembered the conversation clearly. An old friend of mine, a military legal officer turned intellectual property attorney, had insisted I protect my work, file it under your name. He told me, "You can always transfer it later." Later never came. The company grew, contracts expanded, priorities shifted, and somewhere along the way, that transfer was forgotten or ignored. But the system they built their entire business on, the encryption framework that powered everything, it traced back to this. I flipped through the pages carefully, scanning the legal language, the signatures, the clauses, and then I saw it. A single condition buried deep in the document. Precise, quiet, almost invisible if you didn't know what you were looking for. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, ownership would automatically revert. I leaned back in my chair, the realization settling in. They hadn't just let me go. They had just handed everything back. I didn't rush. That's the first thing people get wrong about moments like this. They think it's about anger, about reacting fast, making noise. It isn't. It's about clarity. I sat there in my kitchen, the document still open in front of me, and let everything settle into place. 21 years of building, maintaining, protecting, and one careless decision had just shifted the entire balance. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Marcus Hale, former military counsel, now one of the sharpest intellectual property attorneys in the state. If anyone could tell me whether this clause still held weight after all this time, it was him. He picked up on the second ring. "Skylar didn't expect to hear from you. I need you to look at something." I said, "A clause? Old filing. I need to know if it still stands." There was a pause on the line. Then the sound of movement. Papers being cleared. Focus shifting. "Send it." I scanned the document and forwarded it without another word. Then I waited. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My glass sat untouched now. Even Ranger, my old shepherd, seemed to sense something had changed. Lying quietly near my feet, without making a sound. My phone buzzed again sooner than I expected. Marcus didn't waste time. "It's valid," he said. I didn't respond right away. He continued. "More serious now. If what you're telling me is accurate, if they terminated you without cause, that clause triggered the moment you walked out. Legally, that patent doesn't belong to Aegis Corps anymore." I closed my eyes for a second, letting that land. "Then who does it belong to?" I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, Marcus didn't hesitate. "You, Skylar." The line went quiet again. And just like that, everything had changed. I didn't say goodbye. I just ended the call and sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then I moved. By 6:15 a.m., I was already at my desk, laptop open, the same kind of focus I used to have during critical system breaches. No hesitation, no wasted motion. I logged into the USPTO system. The reversion process wasn't something I had to invent on the spot. It was already there, buried in old files Marcus and I had prepared years ago. Back then, it felt like overkill, a contingency plan you never expect to use. Turns out, it was the only plan that mattered. I pulled up the documentation, reviewed every line, every clause, every timestamp. Everything matched. Termination without cause. Less than 24 hours ago. The condition had already been met. All that was left was to make it official. I filled out the reversion confirmation form carefully. No emotion, just precision. The kind of precision that comes from years of working in systems where mistakes aren't forgiven. A few clicks, a digital signature, final submission. That was it. No dramatic speech, no warning call, no confrontation, just a quiet transfer of ownership. I leaned back in my chair, hands resting on the desk, and let the reality settle in. The encryption architecture that powered Aegis Corps' entire operation, the system behind their defense contracts, their reputation, their valuation. It was no longer theirs. It was mine. Across the city, they were probably starting their day like nothing had changed. Meetings, presentations, strategy sessions filled with confident predictions and empty buzzwords. Ethan Cole was likely standing in front of a room full of executives, talking about innovation and the future, completely unaware that the foundation beneath him had already shifted. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a message. There was no need. Because the moment the system updated, anyone who checked the records would see it. Ownership Skylar James. And when they finally realized what that meant, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a crisis. I made coffee and watched the sun come up like it was any other morning. That was the strange part. Nothing outside had changed. Same quiet street, same routine, same world going about its business. But somewhere across the city, a clock had already started ticking. By 7:40 a.m., I received the confirmation email, official, time-stamped, filed and processed. Patent ownership, Skylar James. I read it once, then closed the screen. No celebration, no reaction, just a quiet understanding of what came next. I opened a new document and began writing something far more important than a resume. Terms. If Aegis Corps wanted to keep using that system, they weren't going to get it for free anymore. I started with the numbers. Their current contracts were worth around $850 million annually. My encryption framework sat at the core of every single one of them. Industry standard for licensing critical infrastructure like that, around 12 to 15%. I went conservative, $18 million upfront, enough to make them pay attention. Not enough to make them walk away, 12% ongoing royalties. Recurring, non-negotiable, a board seat with full voting rights, public acknowledgement of authorship, and one more condition. Ethan Cole steps down. I paused for a second after typing that last line. Not out of hesitation, out of certainty. Because this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about correction, across town. I could already picture it. The leadership team gathering in glass-walled rooms, talking strategy, pushing timelines forward, preparing for the upcoming defense demo, like everything was still under control. Developers compiling builds, engineers reviewing systems, marketing teams polishing presentations filled with phrases like proprietary technology and next-generation security. All of it running on code they no longer owned. They didn't know it yet, but every line they touched, every system they prepared, every promise they made, was already on borrowed ground and borrowed time. Ethan Cole was in his element that morning. I heard about it later, but I could picture it perfectly, confident, animated, performing. He kicked off the strategy meeting like he was launching a product on stage, talking about aggressive timelines, next-generation systems, and market dominance. Every sentence packed with buzzwords, every gesture calculated. What he didn't realize was that every feature he was praising, every system he was pushing forward, was built on the same encryption core I had written years ago. Mine. Not a single person in that room had thought to verify ownership that morning. Why would they? As far as they knew, Everything was still theirs. Around 11:30, my phone lit up. Paul Mercer from development. I let it ring once before answering. "Hey, Skylar," he said, his voice careful. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're integrating your old framework into the new build this week. Demo got moved up. Pentagon's reviewing it in a couple of days." I stayed quiet for a second. Then I said, "Good luck with that." There was a pause. Confusion. "What do you mean?" I ended the call. No explanation, no warning. This was never about making noise. It was about timing. By noon, the official reversion notice had already hit Aegis Corps' legal inbox. Filed, processed, undeniable. But inside companies like that, legal doesn't move unless leadership tells them to. And leadership was too busy celebrating their own momentum to notice the ground shifting beneath them. Ethan probably made a joke about how smooth the transition had been, about how clean the exit was. He thought he had removed a problem. What he didn't understand was this. He had just removed the only person who understood the system and handed control back to the one who built it. They were still moving forward, still preparing, still building. They just didn't know they were doing it on something they no longer owned. The demo day arrived like nothing was wrong. Aegis Corps' main conference hall was polished to perfection. Floor-to-ceiling glass, controlled lighting, a massive LED screen glowing with phrases like "Next Generation Security," rows of seats filled with Pentagon officials, defense partners, and government stakeholders. Every person in that room had influence. Every signature in that room meant money. Ethan Cole walked onto the stage like he owned the future. Confident smile, relaxed posture, that same polished arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you're about to see will redefine secure communication at the highest level." Behind him, the system loaded. Clean interface, seamless design, mine, our proprietary encryption engine. He continued, "Developed in-house at Aegis Corps." A woman stepped onto the stage. "Legal." She leaned in close, whispering something into his ear. At first, Ethan didn't react. Then his smile faltered. What he muttered, too close to the mic. Her voice stayed calm. "Controlled. We can't present this. We don't own the patent anymore." Silence hit the room like a shockwave. Ethan laughed nervously. "That's not possible. It's already filed," she said. "Ownership reverted. It's public." Murmurs spread instantly. Phones came out. Screens lit up. People started searching. And then the documents began circulating. Printed records. Official filings. Patent ownership. Skylar James, not Aegis Corps. A Pentagon official stood up, holding the papers in her hand. "Can you explain why your core system is registered under a different owner?" she asked. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The room shifted. Chairs moved. Conversations erupted. People stood up, one by one, within minutes. Half the audience was gone. The demo never happened. In less than 10 minutes. Confidence turned into doubt. Doubt turned into panic. And panic spread faster than any breach I had ever seen. Because in that moment, it wasn't just a failed presentation. It was the collapse of trust, the collapse of credibility, the collapse of everything they thought they owned. I woke up the next morning to my phone vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, dozens of them, then hundreds, executives, legal teams, unknown numbers, even a few reporters. I let it ring. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee, the number had crossed 200. Messages kept coming in, each one more urgent than the last. "Skylar, we need to talk. Please call me back. This is critical." I didn't respond. Not yet. At 9:10 a.m., I sent a single email. No emotion, no explanation, just terms. $18 million up front. 12% ongoing royalties on all contracts using the encryption system. A permanent board seat with full voting rights. Public acknowledgement of original authorship. And Ethan Cole's immediate resignation. I hit send and closed the laptop. 40 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Skylar." The voice said, "Older, controlled, familiar. We need to resolve this. It was Daniel Cole, the former CEO. I already gave you the terms, I replied. A pause. That's aggressive. No, I said calmly. That's accurate. Silence stretched across the line. You could almost hear the calculation happening on the other end. Not emotion, not pride, damage control. You're putting the company in a difficult position, he finally said. I took a sip of coffee. No, I answered. Your company put itself there. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, the tone had changed. What happens if we agree? You keep your contracts. I said. You keep operating. You get stability. And if we don't, I didn't hesitate. Then every system you run becomes a liability. Every contract becomes exposure. And every day you continue operating, the cost multiplies. He understood. Of course he did. He was one of the few who actually knew what had been built and what it was worth. I'll call you back, he said. The line went dead. 4 hours later, the answer came. They accepted everything, every condition, every number, every demand. Ethan Cole resigned before the end of the day. No announcement, no speech. Just gone, by the next morning. The public statement went live, my name, finally attached to the system I had built. Ownership acknowledged, terms secured, balance restored. Some people would call it revenge. They'd say I waited for the perfect moment, that I planned it, that I took satisfaction in watching it all fall apart. They'd be wrong. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. Because when you spend decades building something that others take for granted, you learn one thing above all else. Never forget where the real value comes from. And if they do, make sure they remember. If you would have done the same as I did, standing your ground, protecting your work, and refusing to let others take credit for what you built, then right, you were right, so I know you see it the same way. If you would choose differently, maybe walking away quietly or letting it go, then just write silence. Or write another choice and tell me what you would have done instead. That's my story. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, don't hold back. I read every comment. For a long time, I believed that hard work would always be recognized, that loyalty would be rewarded, and that if you gave enough of yourself, people would remember your value. I was wrong. What I learned is this: if you don't protect what you build, someone else will take ownership of it without hesitation. Your skills, your time, your ideas, they matter more than any title or position. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, think clearly, and act when it truly counts. If this story meant something to you, you're not just a viewer, you're part of a community that understands value, resilience, and self-respect. So don't be afraid to share your thoughts below. I read every comment. If you believe in standing up for yourself, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Wishing you strength, clarity, and the courage to never undervalue yourself.